believe it is our responsibility to resist the injustices done by our government in our names. We pledge to bring about justice, freedom, and peace. Another world is possible, and we pledge to make it real.
This is Anarchast. From Acapulco, Mexico, Jeff Irwin.
Welcome to Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Today we have Seth King from dailyanarchist.com coming in live and direct from New Hampshire. How are you doing, Seth?
Excellent, thank you.
It's great to have you on the show. I've been reading your website for a number of months now. It's a great website. You've got some great insights. And I really just wanted to ask you the number one question I ask everybody, and it's because it's always an interesting story that people have to tell about how they came into anarchy. And I know I saw on your website that you started quite young thinking about these things. You weren't an anarchist, but you were at a very young age already thinking about these sort of issues, and it's very interesting. Could you just give us a background on how you came to anarchy throughout your life?
Yeah, absolutely. From a very young age, I consider myself a libertarian. That's because I was raised by very liberty-minded parents who really had a strong passion for justice and rights and these sorts of things. And they taught me at a very young age to think for myself. And we talked about the injustices of certain things like the war on drugs and gun confiscation and unjust wars and these sorts of things. So I was fortunate because despite having gone to public school, my parents really raised me very libertarian-like. And so, I started off at a young age as a libertarian, and then a little bit later on in my early teens, my father joined something called the John Birch Society, which I think only Americans are really going to know. It's basically a nationalist, Americanist, constitutionalist organization, which is in many ways very libertarian, in some ways very not libertarian, but they mostly talk about and preach the Constitution and why it's important in the Bill of Rights and securing our rights and these sorts of things, the Founding Fathers, history, and they also talk a lot about the conspiracy for global domination or the New World Order. And so from a very young age, I was really, indoctrinated on, in these sorts of ideas. And because of that, I had always felt quite different than my peers and even, the adults who were teaching me and stuff, because when you learn about these things and you learn about the world, you want to learn about history and you want to learn about economics and you want to learn about all sorts of topics that nobody else cares about. And so, at a young age, you learn to distance yourself a little bit or you're distanced automatically. And because of that, I don't know, it just seems like people are, or at least I was, more willing to be a free thinker, because if at a young age you don't feel like you have to conform, then you're more willing to explore different thoughts and different ideas without feeling embarrassed or, without having to just go along to get along. So, I started off at a very young age libertarian, and as I got older, became more and more libertarian, and then Ron Paul ran for president, and I was very active in the Ron Paul 08 campaign. And afterwards, I was just really distraught because I still couldn't understand that even despite the media that he did get, how people couldn't just instantly recognize it as the truth and common sense and hop on the bandwagon, so to speak. And I had to scratch my head and do a lot of soul searching and think about why it was that the world was so almost unanimously against the philosophy of liberty. And that's when I contacted Walter Block and Tom Woods, because I go to LouRockwell.com every day. And they had mentioned sometimes, every once in a while they'd mention being anarcho-capitalists and how they really like Ron Paul, but they didn't necessarily vote for him. And so I wrote Walter Block an email and I asked him, what is anarcho-capitalism? How can I learn more? I love to read books. Can you recommend a book to me that will do it? And he recommended For a New Liberty and The Ethics of Liberty, both by Murray Rothbard. And then roughly at that same time, I went to the Campaign for Liberty's regional conference in Las Vegas. And I talked to Tom Woods, and he recommended Democracy: The God That Failed. He said that was the book that converted him. So I immediately went home and just devoured those 3 books as soon as I possibly could. And really, it was the first book that did it. And the first book was For New Liberty, and that's the book I always recommend people to read. That'll convert them to anarchism. But the other 2 books just reinforced that. And then another book, which was also instrumental, was Against Intellectual Property by Stefan Kinsella. That one just totally destroys the legitimacy of intellectual property, which helps further destroy the legitimacy in the state and the Constitution and all that stuff. So once I read those books, it just totally, like I said, there's no going back after you read those books. So.
Oh, I know exactly what you're saying with that. We should almost have a warning on every Anarchast. Be careful watching these videos, because if you actually understand what we're talking about, you will basically ruin your life. You basically will not have much of a life the way you used to have it before anyway. You won't be able to go to normal parties with normal people, non-anarchist people, because once you start to understand, and once you wake up, I consider most people brainwashed, because they're basically raised from birth in this sort of a system run by governments. They're thrown into kid jail for 12 years, and when they're not in kid jail, because the mom's always off working, because that's what the government wants anyway, when the mom gets home, she just sits them in front of the TV for another few hours of brainwashing, and so when you're talking to those sort of people, it's really can be very painful, and once you really understand some of the, it's very simple. Anarchy is very simple, and it's really quite strange that so many people have so many misconceptions about it. But again, government has been working to do that. They've been trying to make, anytime someone throws a bomb or blows something up or causes a riot, they say it's anarchist, but it's never anarchist. It's usually actually communists or just drunk college kids usually. Yeah, so I totally understand where you're coming from by saying that once you get to this sort of stuff, you can't go back. I don't think I've ever known an anarchist who's gone back. I don't know if you've ever met it.
I've heard of them, but I've never met any. But no, I mean it is difficult to hang out with even the same people that you consider your friends or family, because if they're still interested in talking about what the Kardashians are wearing, and I don't even know who the Kardashians are. They're talking about pop culture and people that I have no idea who they are, and I really don't care. And their idea of a good time might be watching television or going to a bar and talking about other banal conversations. And to me, that's just totally boring. And what I consider a good time is almost impossible to find another person who's not an anarchist or just an activist in general. They're not going to find those things to be a good time either. So no, I mean, you get to the point where you just can't handle, really being around, and they don't even want you around either, because if you're constantly showing them how unjust their system is, and you're constantly showing just how immoral they are as individuals, they don't want you around either. So it gets to the point where, it's mutually assured, that it's going to be a poor time had for all if you stick around. So yeah, I mean, you end up wanting to be around others that are like yourself, because when you meet another anarchist, it's almost instantaneous. You just know, you just know that they know what you know, and you don't have to spend 5 hours talking about the world before you can finally start just relax and chill out. But that's what that's unfortunately what it's like with non-anarchists, is they'll say or do things that you can't just bite your tongue and just go along with and be like, yeah, let's support the troops or whatever. I mean, you have to open your mouth and be like, no, you're saying something that's horribly ignorant or immoral, and I need to step up and say something about it. So I mean, it's just nice to be able to not always constantly be in a battleground when you're around people. And that's the nice thing about finding other anarchists to be friends with, is you can finally just relax a little bit. But you did mention one other thing, and that is it's difficult to be an anarchist, and I would say yes, socially it can be difficult to be an anarchist, but for me personally, since I've converted to anarchism, it's been a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders, because as a limited government libertarian, your whole strategy, or your whole concept of what winning is and getting back to what you want is you have to convince 50% of the population plus one to vote your way. And, it's just this insurmountable task, this idea of, voting out all the bad politicians, voting in all the good politicians, getting rid of all the bad legislation. I mean, it's just totally, it's insurmountable, and it can really depress a limited government libertarian. But since I've converted anarchism, I've found that, it's become a lot easier, because I no longer see it as a winner take all scenario. It's, even if I just convert, one more person, even if I just show one person that the state has no legitimacy, ideas have consequences, and they're going to start trying to liberate themselves by, disobeying and working towards something that's truly righteous. And so, it's not an all or nothing scenario, which is unfortunately what it's kind of like being a limited government libertarian, which always ends up being a nothing. You always, doesn't matter how many votes you got, if you didn't win, you lose, and with anarchism, it's just converting one more person is a huge win for freedom. So
yeah, there was a scientific poll this about 2 weeks ago, I believe, and I don't necessarily believe everything I read about scientific polls, because a lot of those say that global warming is real and all that. But it was interesting. It said that, and I don't know how they would even manage to compute this, but they basically said that once an idea becomes accepted in 5% or so of the population, it will almost surely be accepted by everyone eventually in the population. That's the number they had. I think it was 5%. It was something around 5%. And I know us as anarchists right now, we're probably at about 0.1% or less. And so we still have a long ways to go. But that kind of gives some hope that we don't have to get more than 50% of the people right off the bat to believe in this stuff for it to actually begin to happen. We can literally just have a few percent. And I really believe that with the internet now. First of all, I wouldn't be an anarchist without the internet. I wouldn't even know what it is, and I wouldn't even know where to get any sort of books or meet people to talk about these sort of things. And secondly, without the internet, there's no way we could get this message out there, because the media, the government has the whole old world media just down pat. They've got it so just straight, and they've got all the kids going to their indoctrination camps, and they're basically all just brainwashed. And there'd just be no way to get it out there. But thanks to the internet, and with all these nation states right now are failing. The Western nation states are completely collapsing at this moment. That's something I talk about in my other life as the dollar vigilante. But as those things start to collapse, and as people have access to this sort of information on the internet, I really think there's a great possibility that we could get some major traction in the Western world in the next few years, like major traction, not just 1%, like 3, 4, 5%. And if we can hit that 5%, who knows? Maybe we'll have everybody. It'd just be so amazing to see that in our lifetimes. And I know a lot of people, Stefan Molyneux thinks it's going to be, probably more than 50 years at least. A lot of other people talk about those sort of numbers, and I call me an super optimist, but I think it's possible we could see it in the next few years, and at least in some limited respect.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with Molyneux on most things, but I'm much more optimistic than he is for the chance of real change in our lifetimes. I mean, one thing I like to tell anarchists that, sometimes get down on the world is that, look, even if you were to take all of the anarchists now, or all the anti-war people or whatever, and if you were to instantaneously convert them to just pro-war statists, the world would be a much worse place than it currently is. And it's bad right now in many regards, but it could be much worse. So just the mere fact that we have so many, anarchists now, and people that understand the philosophy of freedom and blah, 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 the world is better than it would be if they weren't there. So anytime you convert a new person, or show another person that the state has no legitimacy, you don't need to worry about whether or not the state is completely gone. You've already made the world a better place just by converting, one more person. So, but no, you're absolutely right. With the internet, the message can spread instantaneously at almost zero cost. And one thing I also like to tell anarchists is that, look, well,
let me cut you off right there, because we're going to go to part 2, and we'll be right back with Seth King of DailyAnarchist.com.